There's a castle in Transylvania that tourists never expect. Not Bran, with its manufactured Dracula connections. Not the sanitized fortresses turned into museums. But Corvin Castle rising from the hills above Hunedoara like something from a fever dream. Massive. Gothic. Genuinely intimidating in ways that theme parks can never replicate. For the next hour, we'll explore 5 centuries of real history. We'll separate documented fact from persistent legend. We'll walk through dungeons where real people died. This is Corvin Castle, not a fairy tale, but something more complex, more troubling, more real. Chapter 1. The Commoner Who Became a King, 1409 to 1446. The story of Corvin Castle begins with a man who shouldn't have existed. John Hunyadi. Janos Hunyadi. Born around 1409 in Transylvania, probably in the town of Hunedoara itself, to a family that was, depending on which chronicle you believe, either minor nobility, descended from Romanian princes, or simply well-connected commoners. What's certain, John Hunyadi was not born to power, not destined for greatness by bloodline. Everything he achieved, he took through military genius, political maneuvering, and sheer force of will. This matters because Corvin Castle, the fortress that bears his family name, is a monument to that rise. Every stone proclaims, a commoner became regent of Hungary. A man without royal blood commanded armies that saved Christian Europe. Transylvania in the early 1400s is a contested borderland, technically part of the Kingdom of Hungary, populated by Hungarians, Saxons, Romanians, each group with different languages, customs, legal privileges, and constantly threatened by the Ottoman Empire expanding north through the Balkans. The Ottomans are not a distant threat. They're an existential crisis. Constantinople, the last remnant of the Byzantine Empire, the Christian bulwark against Islam, is besieged. Will fall within decades. The Hungarian kingdom stands as the next major obstacle to Ottoman expansion into Central Europe. This is the world John Hunyadi enters. A world where military competence matters more than noble birth. Where commanders who can actually win battles become indispensable. Hunyadi's early career is military. He serves in various campaigns, demonstrates tactical brilliance, understands that fighting the Ottomans requires different strategies than traditional European warfare. The Turks use mobility, archery, feigned retreats. European heavy cavalry is vulnerable to these tactics. Hunyadi adapts, studies Ottoman methods, incorporates their strategies, builds a military force capable of defeating Turkish armies using their own techniques against them. By 1438, he's Ban, military governor, of Severin, a crucial fortress region on the border with Wallachia. By 1441, he's voivode, governor, of Transylvania, the most powerful military position in the most strategically crucial territory in Hungary. And he needs a fortress, a seat of power, a place from which to command armies, store supplies, intimidate rivals, project authority across Transylvania. There's already a structure at Hunedoara, small fortification, modest stone building, dating from the 14th century, adequate for minor nobles, completely insufficient for a man commanding armies. Hunyadi begins construction in 1446. The goal isn't just defensive, it's psychological. He's building a statement, proof that he belongs among the great lords of Europe, that his military achievements have elevated him to nobility regardless of birth. The initial construction focuses on military necessity. Thick walls, up to 3 meters at the base, defensive towers, a keep that can withstand siege, dungeons for prisoners of war, because Hunyadi is constantly capturing Turkish soldiers, Wallachian rebels, political enemies. But even from the beginning, there's ambition beyond pure military function. The architecture is Gothic, pointed arches, vaulted ceilings, stone carved with precision. This isn't crude fortress construction. It's artistry. Dr. Adrian Andrei Rusu is a medieval historian at Babeș-Bolyai University in Cluj-Napoca. Hunyadi understood that architecture communicates power. The castle at Hunedoara announces that he's not just a military commander, but a prince in all but name. The Gothic style connects him to the great aristocratic families of Europe. The scale demonstrates resources. The quality proves sophistication. It's architecture as propaganda. The construction takes years, continues even as Hunyadi campaigns against the Ottomans. The castle grows incrementally, tower added to tower, wall extended, facilities expanded. By 1450, Corvin Castle, named for the raven, Corvus in Latin, that would become the family emblem, is defensible. Impressive, a seat of power appropriate to Transylvania's military governor. But Hunyadi himself is rarely there. He's campaigning, constantly. The Ottoman threat never diminishes. In 1442, Hunyadi wins a decisive victory against the Turks at the Battle of Siban, destroys a major Ottoman force, captures thousands of prisoners. They're marched to Corvin Castle, thrown into the dungeons. These aren't modern prisons. There are no concepts of humane treatment, prisoner rights, due process. Dungeons serve two purposes: holding prisoners for ransom or information, and punishment. The dungeons at Corvin Castle are carved into the bedrock beneath the fortress. Deep, dark, accessible only through narrow passages. Ventilation is minimal, light non-existent. Groundwater seeps through the rock, creating permanent dampness. In winter, prisoners freeze. In summer, they suffocate in stagnant air. Prisoners taken at Sabin are held in these conditions: Turkish soldiers, officers, commanders, kept in darkness while ransom negotiations proceed. Some are released, some die in the dungeons. Their bodies are removed and buried outside the walls. Muslim prisoners cannot be buried in Christian ground. This is normal, standard practice for medieval warfare. Prisoners are assets, sources of information and ransom, but they're not treated humanely. The concept doesn't exist. In 1443, Hunyadi wins another major victory, the Long Campaign, a raid deep into Ottoman territory that reaches as far as the Balkans. He returns with thousands more prisoners. The dungeons at Corvin Castle overflow. Additional cells are carved. The prison complex expands beneath the castle. The upper levels house important prisoners, Turkish commanders, Wallachian nobles, political rivals. The lower levels, the deepest dungeons, hold common soldiers and those deemed unworthy of ransom. The bear pit, Groapa ku Urshi, is excavated during this period, a vertical shaft dropping 15 meters into the bedrock. Prisoners thrown into it cannot escape, cannot even stand fully. The space is too confined. They simply exist in darkness until death or release. The name comes later. Legend claims bears were kept there, though no evidence supports this. But the pit exists. Visitors can look down into it today, understand exactly what it was, a hole for forgetting people. By 1446, John Hunyadi is at the height of his power. Governor of Transylvania, commander of Hungary's armies, victor in multiple campaigns against the Ottomans, builder of Corvin Castle, which has become one of the most formidable fortresses in Eastern Europe. But he's also made enemies. Hungarian nobles resent his power. He's a commoner who commands them. Wallachian princes fear him. He interferes in their politics. The Ottomans hate him. He's the most dangerous Christian commander they face. And the dungeons beneath Corvin Castle will soon hold a prisoner who embodies that complex regional politics. A prisoner who will spend years in darkness beneath the castle. a prisoner whose name will become synonymous with horror. But that comes later. First, Hunyadi must face his greatest military challenge, the siege that will make him a legend. The battle that saves Christian Europe. The Siege of Belgrade, 1456. The moment when John Hunyadi becomes the White Knight who defeated the Ottoman Empire's greatest sultan. Chapter 2. The Siege of Belgrade and the Hero's Death, 1456. July 1456. Sultan Mehmed II, Mehmed the Conqueror, who captured Constantinople 3 years earlier, marches on Belgrade with an army estimated at 60,000 to 100,000 men, the largest Ottoman force ever assembled for a campaign into Hungary. Belgrade sits at the confluence of the Danube and Sava rivers, controls access to Hungary from the south. If it falls, nothing stands between the Ottomans and the Hungarian heartland. The kingdom itself is at risk. King Ladislaus V of Hungary is young, inexperienced, incapable of organizing effective defense. The Hungarian nobility are divided, squabbling among themselves while the greatest threat in generations approaches. John Hunyadi takes command. Not officially regent, not yet, but functioning as Hungary's military savior because no one else can organize resistance. He raises an army, not from the nobility, they're too busy protecting their own lands, from peasants, common soldiers, volunteers motivated by religious fervor and fear of Ottoman conquest. Hunyadi marches south with perhaps 40,000 men, many poorly equipped, some never trained for warfare, but led by a commander who has defeated the Ottomans multiple times, who understands their tactics, who has never lost when he personally commanded the defense. The Siege of Belgrade begins July 4th, 1456. Mehmed's army surrounds the city. Turkish artillery, some of the best in the world, including massive bombards that destroyed Constantinople's walls, begins bombardment. The walls crack. Sections collapse. The garrison inside Belgrade is outnumbered 10 to 1. The situation is desperate. Hunyadi arrives with his relief force July 14th. The Ottomans control the Danube River approaches. Hunyadi forces a river crossing anyway, a naval battle fought with whatever boats can be assembled, against experienced Ottoman river forces. He wins, breaks through, enters Belgrade with reinforcements. The battle that follows lasts several days. July 21st to 22nd are the crucial dates. Ottoman forces breach the walls, enter the city, street fighting, hand-to-hand combat. The garrison and Hunyadi's forces fight building to building. Hunyadi leads from the front. This isn't generals commanding from safe positions. Medieval warfare requires commanders to fight personally, to inspire troops through visible courage. The Ottomans are pushed back, forced from the city. Mehmed himself is wounded. Shot with an arrow or crossbow bolt, accounts vary. The Ottoman army retreats. The siege is broken. Belgrade is saved. Hungary is saved. Christian Europe is saved. Because if Belgrade had fallen, the Ottomans would have swept north. Vienna itself would have been threatened. John Hunyadi is the hero of Christendom. Pope Calixtus III orders church bells rung at noon across Europe to celebrate the victory. This tradition continues in many Catholic churches today. The noon Angelus bell, originally instituted to commemorate Belgrade. Hunyadi is the greatest Christian military commander of his age, the man who defeated Mehmed the Conqueror, the White Knight of Wallachia, the savior of Europe. And then he dies, 3 weeks after the battle, August 11th, 1456. The official cause, plague. The siege camp was rife with disease, typhus, plague, dysentery spreading through armies on both sides. Hunyadi fell ill, developed fever, died rapidly. This is plausible. Disease killed more medieval soldiers than combat. The siege camp at Belgrade would have been a disease incubator, poor sanitation, crowded conditions, summer heat. But immediately, rumors circulate. Suspicions. Questions. Was Hunyadi poisoned? He had enemies. Hungarian nobles who resented his power. Political rivals who saw opportunity in his death. Even allies who might benefit from his removal. The symptoms, sudden illness, rapid death, are consistent with some poisons. Arsenic particularly, which medieval assassins used extensively. But the symptoms are also consistent with plague, typhus, or numerous other diseases. Medical knowledge in 1456 can't distinguish. There's no autopsy, no investigation, just death and speculation. Dr. Rusu has studied the contemporary sources extensively. We'll never know if Hunyadi was poisoned. The evidence is circumstantial, contradictory. What we know with certainty, he died suddenly after his greatest victory, at the moment of maximum power, when he might have leveraged military success into political dominance. His death was convenient for many people. Hunyadi's body is brought back to Transylvania, to Corvin Castle, the fortress he built, the seat of his power. He's buried in the castle's chapel, a tomb appropriate to his status, inscribed with his titles, his victories, his service to Christianity. His sons inherit the castle, Ladislaus Hunyadi, the eldest, and Matthias Corvinus, younger but more politically astute. The Hunyadi family, commoners elevated through military genius, now controls the most powerful fortress in Transylvania. But inheritance doesn't guarantee security. King Ladislaus V sees opportunity. The great John Hunyadi is dead. His sons are young, vulnerable. This is the moment to reclaim royal authority, to reduce the Hunyadi family's power. Political intrigue follows, accusations, legal maneuvers, and finally, in March 1457, a dramatic confrontation. Ladislaus Hunyadi is accused of plotting against the king, arrested in Buda, tried, convicted, beheaded, executed despite his father's service, despite saving Belgrade, despite everything the Hunyadi family had done for Hungary. Matthias Corvinus, still a teenager, is imprisoned, thrown into prison in Prague, his fate uncertain. The Hunyadi family seems destroyed. But then, fortune shifts again. King Ladislaus V dies suddenly in November 1457, 16 years old. Possibly plague, possibly poison. The pattern repeats. Sudden death, convenient timing, speculation without conclusion. Hungary needs a new king. The nobility elect Matthias Corvinus. January 1458. The teenage son of John Hunyadi becomes king of Hungary. A commoner's grandson on the throne. Unprecedented. Revolutionary. Proof that military genius and political skill matter more than bloodline. And Matthias immediately focuses on Corvin Castle. His father built a fortress. Matthias will transform it into a palace, a seat worthy of a Renaissance king. The construction that follows will create the castle tourists see today. The Gothic masterpiece, the architectural wonder, the most beautiful castle in Romania. But it will be built atop the dungeons, the torture chambers, the foundations laid by his father's military campaigns. Beauty constructed on brutality. The contradiction defines Corvin Castle, and defines medieval power itself, that glory and horror are inseparable, that the same stones can witness both triumph and suffering, that the castle of a hero is also a prison, a fortress of light casts the deepest shadows. Chapter 3. The Imprisonment of Dracula, 1462 to 1475. The year is 1462. Vlad III of Wallachia, Vlad Tzepes, Vlad the Impaler, has just fought a brutal campaign against the Ottoman Empire, raided deep into Ottoman Bulgaria, impaled thousands of Turkish soldiers and left them on display, conducted the night attack on Mehmed II's camp, attempting to assassinate the Sultan himself. It's been a vicious, clever, ultimately losing campaign. Mehmed withdraws but leaves behind an army supporting Vlad's brother Radu as Wallachia's new ruler. Vlad's position is untenable. He flees north, seeks asylum with Matthias Corvinus, king of Hungary. This should be straightforward. Vlad and Matthias have correspondence. Diplomatic relationship. Vlad fought the Ottomans, the same enemy Hungary faces. He should be welcomed as an ally, perhaps given resources to reclaim his throne. Instead, he's arrested. The reasons are complex, political, economic. Matthias had received papal funding to launch a crusade against the Ottomans. The money was supposed to finance military campaigns. Matthias used much of it for other purposes, consolidating his own power, building projects, court expenses. The Pope wants accountability. Where's the crusade? Where are the military victories against the Turks? Matthias needs to deflect criticism, needs to demonstrate that he's taking the Ottoman threat seriously, needs a scapegoat. Vlad Tzepes becomes that scapegoat. Matthias circulates letters, possibly forged, suggesting Vlad was negotiating with the Ottomans, considering switching sides, betraying Christianity. These accusations are almost certainly false. Vlad's entire career was defined by fighting the Turks, but the accusations serve Matthias's political needs. Vlad is arrested near Brasov in late 1462, transported to Corvin Castle, imprisoned in the dungeons his ally's father built. The imprisonment lasts approximately 7 years, 1462 to 1475, with some uncertainty about exact dates and conditions. What was Vlad's imprisonment like? The sources are sparse, contradictory, politically motivated, but we can reconstruct the probable reality. Initially, he was held in the deeper dungeons, the levels carved into bedrock, where John Hunyadi imprisoned Turkish commanders, where light never penetrates, where dampness is constant, where prisoners exist in sensory deprivation broken only by interrogation. These conditions are designed to break prisoners psychologically. Medieval dungeons aren't just physical confinement. They're psychological torture. Darkness, isolation, uncertainty about duration. The complete removal of any control over your existence. Vlad Tzepes was accustomed to power, to command, to controlling life and death for thousands. Now he controlled nothing, couldn't even see his own hands in the darkness. How long he remained in the deep dungeons is unclear, but at some point, possibly after a year, possibly longer, his status changed. Vlad was valuable, a deposed prince with potential claims to Wallachia. Keeping him comfortable enough to remain useful while preventing escape made political sense. He was moved to better quarters, still imprisoned but in upper levels of the castle, rooms with windows, light, better conditions. Dr. Maria Holben is a historian specializing in medieval Wallachia at the University of Bucharest. The accounts of Vlad's imprisonment at Corvin Castle are contradictory because his status changed over time. Initially treated as prisoner, possibly enemy. Later as guest, though confined guest. Matthias was keeping options open. If Wallachia's situation changed, having Vlad available as potential ally or puppet ruler was useful. Stories circulate about Vlad's behavior during imprisonment. These are recorded in German and Russian chronicles, written years or decades after the fact, of dubious reliability. One tale, Vlad caught mice and rats in his cell, impaled them on tiny stakes, practiced his signature method of execution even in confinement. This is presented as evidence of his cruelty, his pathological nature. Is it true? Possibly. Prison drives prisoners to strange behaviors, creating routines, maintaining skills, asserting any control over environment, all psychological coping mechanisms. Or it's propaganda. Another story in the growing mythology of Vlad the Impaler, reinforcing his reputation as monster even in captivity. Another tale, Vlad impressed Matthias with his intelligence and political acumen. They conversed, played chess, developed something approximating friendship despite the imprisonment. This is more plausible. Matthias was a sophisticated ruler who appreciated intelligence. Vlad was an experienced prince who understood regional politics. Both spoke multiple languages. Both fought the Ottomans. They had commonalities despite the power imbalance. What's certain, Vlad survived. Imprisonment at Corvin Castle didn't kill him. After 7 years, he was released, or at least his confinement became nominal. By 1475, political calculations had shifted. Matthias needed allies in Wallachia. Vlad's brother Radu was dead. The Ottoman-backed ruler was vulnerable. Perhaps Vlad could reclaim the throne with Hungarian support. Vlad was released, given resources, mounted campaign to retake Wallachia. Briefly succeeded, ruled for 2 months late, 1476. Then was killed in battle or ambush. Circumstances unclear. Body never definitively identified. His connection to Corvin Castle is this imprisonment. 7 years in darkness and confinement. The real Dracula, not the vampire, but the warlord, held beneath the castle tourists now visit. The dungeons where Vlad was held still exist, open to tourists. You can walk down the spiral stairs into the bedrock, stand in the cells where he possibly stood. Experience the darkness, though modern lighting makes it tolerable. The deepest dungeons are partially flooded. Groundwater pools on the stone floors. The walls sweat moisture. The air is cold year-round. Standing there for minutes is uncomfortable. Living there for months is unimaginable. Tour guides tell stories about Vlad, about his imprisonment, about the mice impaled on tiny stakes, about his conversations with Matthias, about the 7 years the Impaler spent in darkness. How much is true? The imprisonment itself is fact, documented in multiple contemporary sources. The duration is approximate but reliable. The conditions can be inferred from the dungeon's physical reality. The details, the mice, the chess games, the relationship with Matthias are less certain. Maybe true, maybe embellished, maybe invented. What matters is that Vlad Tepes was here, in these specific dungeons, below this specific castle. This is documented connection between Transylvania's most infamous historical figure and one of its most impressive fortresses. Not Bran Castle, where Vlad probably never stayed. Not Ponari, which is too ruined for tourism, but Corvin Castle, where his imprisonment is historical fact. The tourists want Dracula connections. Corvin Castle has a real one, just not the vampire. The actual prince, imprisoned, suffering, eventually released to die violently in the country he'd fought to rule. The dungeons remember, the stones witness, and the darkness where Vlad spent 7 years remains, now illuminated for tourists, but fundamentally unchanged from the prison that held the Impaler. Chapter 4. The Raven's Palace. While Vlad Tepes suffers in the dungeons below, Matthias Corvinus transforms the fortress above into something extraordinary. Matthias becomes king of Hungary at 15 years old, son of a commoner, grandson of an unknown Romanian or Hungarian minor noble. On the throne, through military legacy and political maneuvering, he needs to prove he belongs, that his kingship is legitimate, that he's not just a military commander's son, but a Renaissance prince worthy of respect from Europe's established monarchies. Architecture becomes his proof. Matthias is deeply cultured, educated in humanist traditions, fluent in Latin, Hungarian, German, probably Romanian. Interested in art, literature, philosophy, he establishes the Bibliotheca Corviniana, one of Europe's finest libraries, second only to the Vatican. And he transforms Corvin Castle from military fortress into Renaissance palace. The project spans decades, consumes enormous resources, creates the castle tourists see today. The construction begins in the late 1460s, continues through 1470s, and reaches completion around 1480. The timeline overlaps with Vlad's imprisonment. Ironic that while the impaler sits in darkness below, Italian and German masons work above, creating beauty. Matthias brings in master builders from across Europe, Italian architects familiar with Renaissance principles, German Gothic stonemasons, sculptors, painters, artisans, the best craftsmen available. The castle expands dramatically. New wings added to John Hunyadi's original fortress. The Knights' Hall, Sala Diete, a massive ceremonial space for state occasions. The Council Hall, private apartments for the royal family. A proper chapel replacing the simpler one where Matthias's father is buried. The architecture is Gothic transitioning toward Renaissance. Pointed arches, ribbed vaults, flying buttresses, structural elements made decorative, stone carved with intricate detail, windows enlarged to flood interiors with light. The exterior transforms most dramatically. Towers rise higher, some reaching 40 meters. Decorative elements added to purely military features. Crenellations become ornamental. The bridge spanning the gorge becomes architectural statement, 60 meters long, supported by massive stone piers, creating theatrical entrance to the castle. Dr. Rusu has studied the architectural evolution extensively. Matthias was building political legitimacy through architecture. Every element communicates. I am a Renaissance prince. I command resources. I understand European culture. I deserve to be king despite my common birth. The castle is argument in stone, proof that the Corvinus dynasty belongs among Europe's great ruling families. The Corvinus family emblem, the raven, appears everywhere, carved into stone, painted on walls, incorporated into decorative elements. The legend surrounding the raven is typical dynastic mythology. Story goes, when Matthias was infant, a raven stole his ring. His mother feared this was bad omen, but his father, John Hunyadi, retrieved the ring from the raven's nest, interpreting it as sign that his son would rise higher than expected. The raven became family symbol, politically useful legend, connects the family to divine providence, suggests their rise to power was fated, not merely opportunistic, makes the commoner dynasty seem destined for greatness. The raven, Corvus in Latin, hence Corvinus, covers the castle. Stone ravens perch on towers. Painted ravens decorate halls. The family identity becomes inseparable from the castle's identity. But beneath the beauty, the dark foundation remains. The dungeons are expanded even as the palace grows. More prisoners means more cells needed. Matthias imprisons extensively. Political enemies. Turkish prisoners from his campaigns, he continues fighting the Ottomans throughout his reign. Criminals, debtors, anyone who threatens his authority or fails to pay taxes. The bear pit, the vertical shaft dropping into bedrock, sees continued use. Prisoners thrown in simply disappear, forgotten. The palace above hosts Renaissance splendor, while below, people die in darkness. The torture chambers are maintained, improved, expanded. Torture is legal investigative tool. Matthias's courts use it regularly. The castle has dedicated spaces for interrogation. Instruments are kept ready, professional torturers on staff. The strappado, suspending prisoners by wrists tied behind backs. The rack, stretching bodies until joints separate. The wheel, breaking limbs methodically. All standard, all documented in court records, all happening below the palace where Matthias hosts artists, philosophers, and diplomats. This contradiction defines medieval power. Beauty and brutality coexist without cognitive dissonance. The same ruler who commissions libraries tortures political enemies. The same castle hosts humanist scholars and tortures prisoners in adjacent rooms. Modern sensibilities struggle with this. We prefer clear moral categories. But medieval rulers saw no contradiction. Torture was justice. Imprisonment was legitimate. Beauty could coexist with cruelty because they served different functions. By 1480, Corvin Castle is transformed. The military fortress John Hunyadi built has become one of the most impressive palaces in Central Europe. Gothic architecture rivaling anything in France or Germany. Interior decoration matching Italian Renaissance standards. Matthias uses the castle for state occasions, diplomatic receptions, military planning. He commands from here during campaigns, returns here between wars, dies here, in Corvin Castle, April 1490, at age 47. His death mirrors his father's, sudden, unexpected, possibly natural, possibly poisoned. Matthias is planning campaign, in good health, then develops fever, dies within days. Plague? Poison? Unknown. The pattern repeats. Convenient death. Unverifiable cause. Speculation without conclusion. Matthias dies without legitimate heir. His illegitimate son is passed over. The Hungarian crown goes to Władysław II Jagiellon of Bohemia. Weak king. Ineffectual. The Hunyadi dynasty ends. Corvin Castle passes to various nobles. Changes hands multiple times through 16th and 17th centuries. Maintained but not expanded. Used as administrative center. Garrison. Prison. The Renaissance glory fades. The castle becomes practical again. Military. Administrative. The beauty remains but loses its political purpose. By 1700, Corvin Castle is just another fortress. Impressive architecture. Dark history. But no longer center of power. No longer shaping regional politics. The dungeons still hold prisoners. The torture chambers still function. The bridge still spans the gorge. But the castle is provincial, forgotten by larger history. And then comes the 18th century. The Habsburgs consolidate control over Transylvania. They don't need fortresses like Corvin, have their own palaces, their own power centers. Corvin Castle becomes obsolete, abandoned, left to decay into romantic ruin. The decline begins, and with it, the ghost stories, the legends, the transformation of dark history into Gothic romance. Chapter 5. The Three Prisoners and the Legend of the Well. The most famous legend associated with Corvin Castle isn't about Vlad. It's about three Turkish prisoners and a well dug through solid rock. The story goes like this. During the 15th century, dates vary in different tellings, three Turkish prisoners of war are held in Corvin Castle's dungeons. Officers, perhaps, men of some importance, potential ransom value. They're offered a deal. Dig a well in the castle's interior courtyard, reaching water through the bedrock, and you'll earn your freedom. The task is nearly impossible. The courtyard sits atop solid rock. Water table is deep. The prisoners have only hand tools, chisels, hammers, primitive equipment. But the alternative is remaining in the dungeons indefinitely, possibly years, possibly forever. So they accept. They dig. Years pass. 10 years according to some versions. 15 according to others. 28 years in the most extreme tellings. They chisel through rock, meter by meter. The well shaft descends, 10 meters deep, 20, 30. Finally, at approximately 30 meters depth, they strike water. The well is complete. Fresh water flows. The castle has reliable water supply even during siege. The prisoners present themselves to the castle's lord, Matthias Corvinus. In most versions of the tale, they've fulfilled their bargain. Years of labor, the impossible task completed. They've earned freedom. And Matthias, or whoever is lord at that moment, responds with one word carved into the stone cap of the well. Iti va fika apa, dar sufletul nu. You will have water, but not your soul. The prisoners are not freed. The bargain is betrayed. They remain imprisoned, die in the dungeons despite completing the work. The well exists. This is fact. You can see it in Corvin Castle's courtyard today. A stone-lined shaft descending 30 meters into bedrock, hand-dug. Astonishing engineering achievement even with modern tools, nearly impossible with medieval technology. The inscription exists, carved into the well's stone cap. The words are there. But the story? The 3 Turkish prisoners? The decades of labor? The betrayed bargain? Folklore, legend, almost certainly untrue. Dr. Holben has researched the well's actual history. The well was dug, probably in the late 15th century. Required significant labor, probably years. But 3 prisoners digging alone? For decades? Logistically implausible. Castle wells were major projects involving multiple workers, professional well diggers. The romantic story of 3 Turks digging for freedom is later invention. The inscription is genuine, but probably dates from the 16th or 17th century, added long after the well's construction. The phrase is more likely philosophical commentary. Water represents material needs met, soul represents spiritual fulfillment denied, then literal reference to specific prisoners. So why does the legend persist? Why is it the most repeated story about Corvin Castle? Because it fits. It captures something true about the castle, even if the specific details are invented. Corvin Castle did hold Turkish prisoners. Hundreds, probably thousands over the centuries. Prisoners of war were kept in terrible conditions. Many died in the dungeons. Freedom was often promised and denied. Ransom negotiations failed. Prisoners lost value. Circumstances changed. The legend of the well condenses centuries of imprisonment into one story, makes the castle's darkness comprehensible, gives it narrative form. And the betrayal, the promise broken, freedom denied despite labor completed, resonates. It represents injustice, arbitrary power, the vulnerability of prisoners to their captors' whims. Modern visitors stand beside the well, read the inscription, look down the dark shaft. They're told the story of 3 Turks digging for decades, earning freedom through superhuman effort, being betrayed at the moment of success. It's compelling, tragic, emotionally powerful. The fact that it's probably untrue doesn't diminish its cultural function. The well becomes symbol for the castle's darkness, for the suffering that happened here, for the arbitrary nature of medieval justice. Other legends accumulate. Ghost stories, prisoners who haunt the dungeons, sounds of digging from beneath the courtyard, Turkish voices echoing from the well shaft. Are these real? Paranormal investigators claim evidence. Electronic voice phenomena? Temperature anomalies? Electromagnetic disturbances? Or are they tourist attractions? Stories that enhance the castle's Gothic atmosphere? Marketing for a castle that benefits from reputation for being haunted? The truth is probably neither supernatural nor purely commercial. The legends emerge from real darkness, from the knowledge that people suffered here, that prisoners died in these dungeons, that the castle witnessed centuries of imprisonment, torture, execution. The stones remember even if specific details are lost. The architecture itself communicates suffering, the narrow cells, the lightless depths, the vertical shaft of the bear pit. Modern visitors respond to this, feel the oppressive atmosphere in the dungeons, experience discomfort even with electric lighting and known exit routes. Imagine what it was like without those comforts. The legends make the suffering narratable, give it characters, plot, emotional resonance, transform abstract historical horror into stories humans can process. The 3 Turkish prisoners probably never existed, but thousands of real prisoners did. The well-required real labor from real people, probably imprisoned, probably suffering. The legend honors them imperfectly, gets the details wrong, but captures the essential truth. Corvin Castle's beauty was built atop suffering. The Renaissance palace stands above dungeons where people died. The well connects those levels. Physical connection. It descends from the beautiful courtyard into the dark bedrock. Symbolic connection. It represents how beauty and brutality intertwine. The inscription says it best. You will have water, but not your soul. Material achievement without spiritual freedom. Physical survival without human dignity. The castle in miniature. Tourists photograph the well. Read the inscription. Repeat the legend to each other. Whether they believe it literally doesn't matter. The emotional truth is sufficient. Corvin Castle remembers. The well witnesses. The legend speaks truth about the castle even if it's not factual about specific prisoners. And that's folklore's function. Not to preserve accurate history, but to communicate cultural memory. To make the past meaningful for the present. To ensure that suffering isn't forgotten even when specific victims can't be named. Chapter 6. Decline, Ruin, and Romantic Rediscovery, 1700 to 1900. By 1700, Corvin Castle is obsolete. Modern warfare has rendered medieval fortresses irrelevant. Artillery can breach any walls. Standing armies replace feudal levies. Centralized governments don't need local strongholds. The Habsburg Empire, which controls Transylvania, has its own administrative systems. Corvin Castle becomes just a building, large, expensive to maintain, historically significant but functionally useless. The Habsburg authorities consider options. Convert it to administrative offices? The structure is too grand, too impractical. Use it as military barracks? Better facilities exist elsewhere. Maintain it as symbol of imperial power? Too remote from Vienna to matter politically. The decision is essentially to do nothing. The castle is nominally maintained. A skeleton staff keeps roofs from leaking. But no investment, no improvements. Just preservation in minimal sense. Ownership transfers between Habsburg administrators and local noble families. The Hunyadi connection is long severed. The castle becomes property that changes hands through inheritance, sale, political favor. Each owner faces the same problem. Maintaining a Gothic palace requires enormous resources for little practical benefit. The castle is beautiful but burdensome. Maintenance declines. The roof develops leaks. Water damage spreads. Stone weathers without repair. Wooden elements rot. Glass windows break and aren't replaced. By 1750, significant sections are uninhabitable. The Knights' Hall's roof partially collapses. Water floods the lower dungeons. They become even more nightmarish, though no longer used for prisoners. The torture chambers are sealed, the instruments removed or left to rust. The castle's function as prison effectively ends. Austria has modern prisons. Medieval dungeons are obsolete. Local population begins treating the castle as ruin, quarrying stone for other construction, removing iron fixtures for scrap. The slow cannibalization that happens to abandoned buildings everywhere. By 1800, Corvin Castle is picturesque ruin, still standing, still impressive architecturally, but decaying. Romantic in the way ruins are romantic, Gothic architecture crumbling slowly back into nature. And then Romanticism discovers it. The Romantic movement of the late 18th and 19th centuries is obsessed with medieval architecture. Gothic ruins represent the sublime, beauty mixed with decay, the passage of time, the impermanence of human achievement. Poets, painters, writers travel through Transylvania. They see Corvin Castle and are captivated. The Gothic architecture, the dramatic setting, the bridge spanning the gorge, the towers reaching skyward, all of it decaying beautifully, covered in vegetation, birds nesting in empty halls, and the history. John Hunyadi, legendary warrior. Matthias Corvinus, Renaissance king. Vlad the Impaler imprisoned in dungeons. Turkish prisoners digging wells. Centuries of warfare, imprisonment, triumph, tragedy. Perfect material for romantic imagination. Paintings proliferate. Artists capture Corvin Castle in various stages of decay. Watercolors showing towers against stormy skies. Oil paintings emphasizing Gothic drama. Sketches focusing on architectural details. Travel writers included in accounts of Transylvania. Describe the ruins, embellish the history. Add atmospheric details. Moonlit nights, ghostly sounds, the sensation of being watched. The ghost stories intensify. No longer just local folklore, now cultivated as tourist attraction. Visitors want to hear about hauntings, about prisoners' spirits, about dark legends. The well story becomes standardized during this period. The 3 Turkish prisoners, the decades of digging, the betrayed bargain. It achieves its current form, probably invented or heavily embellished by Romantic writers who found the actual history insufficiently dramatic. By 1850, Corvin Castle is famous across Europe, not as important historical site, as romantic ruin, as Gothic atmosphere, as setting for dark imagination. Victor Hugo mentions it. Bram Stoker might have heard of it. Though he never visited Romania, he researched Transylvanian castles for Dracula. The castle enters European cultural consciousness as archetype of Gothic fortress. But the physical decay continues. The romantic appeal actually works against preservation. Ruins are attractive precisely because they're ruined. Restoration would diminish their appeal. Local authorities begin recognizing the problem. The castle is a significant historical monument. It shouldn't be allowed to collapse completely. But restoration would be enormously expensive. In 1868, the castle is purchased by the Austro-Hungarian state. Official government ownership means official responsibility for preservation. Some restoration work begins, stabilizing structures, preventing complete collapse, making sections safe for visitors. But this is minimal intervention, enough to prevent total loss, but not enough to restore functionality. The castle becomes official tourist destination. Visitors are charged admission. Guards are stationed. The dungeons are open to tourists for the first time. People can descend into the depths, see the torture chambers, experience the darkness. This creates tension. Tourism generates revenue, but it also damages the site. Visitors take souvenirs, stones, iron fixtures, anything portable. Graffiti appears. The castle suffers from too much interest. By 1900, Corvin Castle is in crisis. Romantic ruin status has created fame, but not preservation. The structure is deteriorating. Without major restoration, it will collapse within decades. The 20th century will bring world wars, regime changes, communist control, eventual restoration. But in 1900, the castle's future is uncertain. The dungeons are flooded. The torture chambers are rusted. The Knight's Hall is open to sky. The bridge is structurally questionable. The towers are dangerous to enter. But it's still magnificent, still imposing, still the most visually striking castle in Transylvania, still haunted, not by ghosts, but by its history, by everything that happened within those walls, by the suffering that architectural beauty concealed. The castle waits for restoration, for purpose, for transformation from ruin into monument, for the decision about what it should be in the modern world. Museum? Tourist attraction? Historical memorial? Something else? That decision will be made in the 20th century. But the 19th century leaves Corvin Castle suspended between past and future, between decay and preservation, between history and legend. A Gothic ruin, a romantic fantasy, a dark history, an uncertain future. All of it contained in stone walls that have stood for 5 centuries and will stand for centuries more, if someone decides they're worth saving. Chapter 7. Restoration and the Communist Era, 1900 to 1989. The 20th century arrives, and with it, modernity's complicated relationship with medieval architecture. Corvin Castle enters the century as a crumbling Gothic ruin, exits it as a restored, functioning museum. The transformation is neither simple nor straightforward. The first major restoration efforts begin in the early 1900s, while Transylvania is still part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The government allocates funds for emergency stabilization. Roofs are repaired, walls are reinforced. The immediate threat of collapse is addressed. But these are stopgap measures. Real restoration, returning the castle to something approximating its 15th century glory, would require resources beyond what the empire is willing to invest in a provincial fortress. Then comes World War I. The Austro-Hungarian Empire collapses. Romania gains Transylvania in 1918. The castle becomes Romanian property. The interwar Romanian government has complicated feelings about Corvin Castle. It's historically significant, architecturally important, a major cultural monument. But it's also a Hungarian monument, built by Hungarian kings, associated with Hungarian history, named for a Hungarian dynasty, in a region where Romanian-Hungarian ethnic tensions are significant. Still, Corvin Castle is too impressive to ignore. Restoration work continues through the 1920s and 30s. Romanian architects and craftsmen repair sections. The Knight's Hall roof is restored. Windows are replaced. The castle becomes safer for visitors. Tourism increases. The castle's reputation as most beautiful castle in Romania becomes established. Visitors come from across Europe. The dungeons are particular attraction. Dark history draws crowds. Then World War II. Romania initially sides with Axis, then switches to Allies. Fighting sweeps across Transylvania. The castle, fortunately, sees minimal direct damage, too remote for major combat. But maintenance halts during war years. Post-war, Romania becomes communist. The new regime faces decisions about historical monuments. Communist ideology theoretically opposes aristocratic history. Castles represent feudal oppression. Should they be preserved? Pragmatism wins. Tourism generates revenue. Foreign currency. Corvin Castle is too valuable economically to demolish or ignore. The communist regime nationalizes the castle, makes it state property, allocates funds for restoration. The work intensifies through the 1950s and 60s. This restoration is controversial. The goal is returning castle to medieval appearance. But what does that mean? Which period? John Hunyadi's military fortress? Matthias Corvinus's Renaissance palace? The intermediate stages? The decision, practically, is to restore the most visually impressive elements. The Gothic towers, the bridge, the Knight's Hall, the exterior architecture that makes the castle photogenic. Interior restoration is less comprehensive. The dungeons are preserved as they are, atmospheric, dark, suitably Gothic. The torture chambers are maintained for tourist appeal. Some chambers are restored to house museum displays. Dr. Alexandru Barnea is an architectural historian at the Polytechnic University of Timișoara, who has studied the restoration work. The communist-era restoration was pragmatic, not scholarly. The goal was creating visually impressive tourist destination, not accurate historical reconstruction. They restored what looked good, maintained what tourists wanted to see, the dungeons especially, and modernized where necessary for visitor safety. The museum opens officially in 1956. Collections include medieval weapons, armor, furniture, artwork, some original to the castle, some brought from other sites. The distinction isn't always clear to visitors. The dungeons become star attraction. Visitors descend spiral stairs into bedrock, walk through cells where prisoners were kept, see the bear pit, the vertical shaft dropping 15 meters, stand in torture chambers, though actual instruments are removed or replaced with replicas. The well, with the legendary inscription about the 3 Turkish prisoners, is preserved, enhanced as tourist focal point. The legend is presented as fact in official materials. Good story trumps accurate history. Through the 1960s, 70s, 80s, Corvin Castle becomes one of Romania's premier tourist destinations. Tens of thousands visit annually. The castle generates significant revenue for the regime, but tourism creates damage. Wear on stone, graffiti, theft of small artifacts. The constant traffic of visitors erodes the site, even as admission fees fund preservation. The castle also becomes filming location. Romanian and international productions use it for medieval settings. The Gothic architecture, the dungeons, the dramatic bridge, all perfect for films requiring authentic-looking castles. This exposure increases fame. Corvin Castle appears in movies, television shows, documentaries, becomes internationally recognizable as archetypal Gothic fortress. By 1989, when communism falls, Corvin Castle is fully restored, or at least restored to 1980s standards. Functioning museum, major tourist attraction, economically valuable cultural monument. The post-communist era brings new challenges. Ownership questions. Should the castle be privatized? Returned to anyone? Remain state property? Maintenance funding? Who pays for continued preservation? Tourism management? How to balance access with conservation? These questions are still being resolved, but Corvin Castle survives the transition. Remains state property, managed by Romanian Cultural Ministry. Continues operating as museum. Restoration work is ongoing. 21st century techniques allow more sophisticated preservation, structural analysis, climate control, modern materials that better protect medieval stone. The goal has shifted from simply preventing collapse to scholarly preservation, understanding and maintaining the castle as historical document. Not just tourist attraction, but actual monument to 15th century architecture and engineering. But tension remains between these functions. Tourists want atmosphere, darkness, danger, Gothic drama. Scholars want accuracy, proper labeling, contextual information, distinction between original and restored elements. The dungeons exemplify this tension. Tourists want to experience them as dark, oppressive spaces. Feel the atmosphere of imprisonment. Imagine what prisoners endured. But that requires keeping them dark, damp, atmospheric, which conflicts with preservation needs. Dampness damages stone, darkness prevents proper monitoring, atmospheric conditions accelerate decay. The compromise is practical. The dungeons are lit minimally, enough for visitor safety, but maintaining atmospheric darkness. Ventilation improves air quality without eliminating the subterranean feel. Information plaques provide historical context. The torture chambers present different problem. The original instruments are gone, removed or destroyed centuries ago. Replicas are displayed. But are these educational or exploitative? Is showing torture instruments teaching history or providing cheap thrills? Is it memorializing suffering or entertainment? The castle's current management tries to balance. Information emphasizes that torture was legal practice, that real people suffered in these rooms, that the history is dark and should be taken seriously. But they also know tourists want to see torture chambers, that dungeons sell tickets, that dark history is commercial asset. This is modern dilemma for all sites of historical horror. How to be respectful while being accessible. How to educate while attracting visitors. How to preserve authenticity while ensuring safety. Corvin Castle doesn't have perfect answers, but it tries. The restoration is ongoing. The history is presented more accurately now than during communist era. The darkness is acknowledged, not sanitized, and visitors still come. By the hundreds of thousands annually. They take photos of the bridge, descend into dungeons, read about Vlad's imprisonment, hear the legend of the well. They walk through the Knight's Hall, magnificent with restored Gothic vaulting, stand in the chapel where John Hunyadi is buried, climb towers for views across Hunedoara. They experience beauty and horror, Renaissance artistry and medieval brutality. The contradiction that defines Corvin Castle. The restoration has saved the castle, prevented its collapse into ruin, ensured it survives for future generations. But restoration can't change what the castle is, can't erase the dungeons, can't remove the darkness from the foundation. The stones remember, and no amount of restoration changes what they remember.